to this new podcast of Random Contemplations with my dear friend Hemant Gupta. Welcome, Hemant, to this new thought that I have of discussing something with you. Last, when we messaged each other, that I had a thought something to do with information and knowledge. This morning, there was some clarity on it while thinking what would I want to call this podcast in particular. The idea is we can call it information, knowledge, wisdom. So it kind of covers the whole ground of where we might go with this. I want to start on a very strong personal note. I think a day or two back, when I was doing my regular meditation sitting, uh, during the sitting, I had a lot of thoughts of varied kinds arising every now and then, and I was disturbed most of the part of the sitting because I could not figure out where they were coming from or what they were related to at that point of time. This morning, and just while we were figuring out the technology issues between now and last 15-20 minutes, I realized that part of that was information that was coming to me from whatever my earlier sources, memories, and uh, reactions to certain things that might have happened in the recent or the not so recent past. The knowledge was that okay, these are things, these are memories, these are not memories, these are my reactions to it. This is my perception of a certain thing. But that knowledge wasn't really connected to the information. I had to actually guide myself to calm down to have a look at it. And much later in the sitting, or maybe even after the sitting, I realized the wisdom was that these thoughts will come and go. I need not necessarily attach to them and figure out a solution to whatever is arising. All three seemed independent to me, and this also kind of contextualized what I am doing in the outside world. On a daily basis, I am quite active on social media very often, and a lot of inputs go in which don't necessarily need lead to any kind of knowledge for me. Earlier, when there were uh, limitation on sources of how I was doing my research, so I had to actually go and seek out knowledge that was related to the subject that I was interested in. Now on social media, I have a barrage of information coming in which may not necessarily be controlled by me, but by some algorithm which has kind of calculated that I've stayed 30 seconds on this one, or which may be 30 seconds of wasted time, perhaps. Like my own interpretation of it might have been, oh, I shouldn't have wasted my time on this, it wasn't useful. But the algo doesn't see it like that. It sees 30 seconds added to one kind of this and then shows me 10 videos of the same sort, and of which one might be of interest to me or not of interest to me. So my question to you is, it's a holistic question as of right now. How do you see information, knowledge, and wisdom, and your initial thoughts on the subject before I get into any particular questions?
Yeah. Again, Bunty, I think I'm deeply grateful for these invocations that we are able to co-sense and co-discover in some sense. So I'm deeply grateful to you for that, Bunty. What is coming up for me is a bunch of things. Long back, I used to listen to Swami Subodhananda, and some of his teachings have stayed with me. So he used to say an interesting thing, and I may be getting the sources wrong. I mean, I'm very sure of listening it from Swami Subodhananda, but the following might be uh, uh, juxtaposed. So he mentioned two things: jnanam bandhanam and nahi jnanena sadrisham pavitram iha vidyate. The first one, jnanam bandhanam, is actually talking about knowledge that binds. And the second one talks about knowledge that liberates. So the question is, the seeking that we do, or the default mode network, as it is called in neuroscience, which is constantly churning out thoughts. What kind of thoughts are getting generated, right? And once we look at deeper into the thoughts, uh, we could try and see if it can be nuanced. Like you try to nuance it as information, knowledge, and wisdom. It's very interesting. A few decades back, a systems thinker, Russell Akoff, actually reflected on this and came up with five distinctions: data, information, knowledge, understanding, and wisdom.
Okay.
So basically, as you move on the spectrum, wisdom can be seen as it is applicable in a wider context, for more number of people. But the more you get closer to data, there is more dynamism and locality, or change application. Wisdom has wider application across generations, across geographies, but data would be something which is so anything in between is moving from. So if I say one, number one, just now, the moment I say number one, you don't know what it is, right? Is it I'm saying somebody came number one, or is it that Sachin Tendulkar opens the innings and he's called number one, or what is it, right? So I've just given you data. Now, the moment you connect it with some information, another data point or something, then it becomes information. And then you come to another point where you say, okay, a little more connections, you try and see, so it becomes knowledge. A more nuanced understanding of that knowledge, a more nuanced application of the knowledge becomes understanding.
Okay.
Right? And at some point it becomes wisdom. So in that sense, the first thing that comes to me is this rubric of how you tried to put this, and I think your thinking is similar to what Russell Akoff is. So that's one thing that coming up for me. The second thing that came up was again going back to Jnanam Bandhanam, which is knowledge that binds and knowledge that liberates. I think there's an interesting French thinker in the last century, Simone de Beauvoir, who wrote a very interesting essay called "The Ethics of Ambiguity." Very interestingly, what she says is that we are constantly trying to seek patterns and meanings and order around us, certainty around us, control around us. And her essay talks about that the more we seek it, the more we'll come across paradoxes and ambiguities and confusions and things that would not be under your control. And unless we understand our relationships with these, we will be driven by these rather than driving or channeling them. And yet, even if you're channeling them, you will still keep coming across a lot of paradoxes, inconsistencies, ambiguities, and stuff. And you need to then make a cosmological belief. Either it's there or you need to shift it to see how these are around us, and what is our relationship with them? What do they do to us, and what can we do to them? So that's the second bucket, Bunty. The third bucket came to me, which was, we all end up doing a lot of chores every day, brushing our teeth, making our bed, ironing our clothes, maybe wearing and looking in the mirror. Our day is full of a lot of these small acts, which generally we call as chore. Sometimes we find them boring, and sometimes we find them, we just take them to be there, right? Our relationship with the chore needs to be brought into awareness, I believe. Now, why I invoke that is, the moment we start seeing our relationship with chore, we then start seeing what is not insight in the knowledge framework, what is not curious, what is not interesting in the knowledge domain. Because everything that is non-curious, non-interesting, non-insight would fall into the mental chore, in some sense a mental chore. What's our relationship with mental chore? How do we see it? And I'll close it with another thinker, Nassim Nicholas Taleb, who rose to fame with his famous book called The Black Swan. And Nassim has this interesting practice that he does. Most of the times when you go out of home, you generally are going out for something, you're fetching vegetables, you're going and doing something, or you're going to drop your kid or picking up the kid. He says that sometimes we should just go out and we don't know why we are going out, and we just, what he calls as flanner. We're just there. We're just strolling, wandering. So yeah, these are some of the stuff that is coming up for me as I hear you, Bunty. You can build on it, or yeah.
Okay. Somewhere there was one thing that particularly struck a chord with me in what you just explained, and it is related and unrelated both. Uh, you did mention that that we try and be sure uh, through certain patterns. Uh, in my head, that turned out to be absolutes of sort, even if they are for temporary time. And being a writer, I go back to words very often because I find that we do not give enough emphasis to the understanding behind the words. I personally also do not, perhaps, because of the rush of it, communication, that I want to tell you this, and I may not give it enough time to seep in uh, and find the right word that expresses exactly, or at least the closest to what I have been wanting to communicate. And very often, given the time starved lives that we are leading, supposedly, we are in hurry to make a point about something. Uh, this is the surface part of what I'm suggesting. I want to go a lower level on the same thought. Is it because we want to use the word as communicating the fact that we are sure of the subject rather than actually being sure? It is just the communication of being sure. Uh, I may not, like even now when I'm struggling with what I want to say, it is not lack of vocabulary, it is trying to figure out exactly what I want to say, rather than getting stuck with the word and communicating something that I may not mean if I look at the nuance of it. So, are we looking for patterns, or quote unquote using words as definitive measures of a certain thought, whereas the thought, form, and expression are all very fluid, uh, because uh, going back a little to when I was younger and was studying body language and uh, other kinds of non-verbal communication, uh, in my whatever stint I tried to be a film writer for a while, the nuances that one brought into the scene where expressions mattered more than the dialogue, and the reading of it, and while communicating that scene to audiences whom I was expressing the story to, their reading of that was all based on non-verbal cues, because even in my presentation, how excited I was and how, so there were layers and layers of communication happening from the thought to the written word to the expression to the excitement at that moment while presenting, even sometimes generated falsely because I needed to. So I may have a mood swing at that point of time. I may have had a fight with somebody, and I'm now supposed to present to you, and there is going to be monetary transaction between us. So I need to look excited. So these are layers not directly connected to what was being communicated in the story. So I go back to simplify the question. Are words being used for the sake of using them without understanding their actual import? And if so, how can one control this tendency to be more truthful to what one is feeling and trying to express rather than just use words? flamboyantly, expressively, strongly, whatever you want to call them. But putting a word out there is a responsibility, but one needs to understand what is one trying to respond, and for that layer uh, to be understood within first, even before I send it out to you. What is where are the gaps? What are things that must be thought about? One needs to be careful. Any thoughts on that from you?
Yeah, I have a bunch of things that are emerging here, Bunty.
Mm.
Um, and I'll try and bucket them in 7 small buckets.
Oh,
The first one was where uh, you sort of invoked on seeking patterns, seeking order, seeking control, seeking certainty, seeking predictability. Uh, and I would tie it to one of our conversations, which I don't remember which one, but I remember mentioning Margaret Heffernan, conversation with Margaret Heffernan, where this interesting grid came up, which is adaptive certainty, maladaptive certainty, adaptive uncertainty, maladaptive
yeah.
uncertainty. I think we, as a species, we seek all 4 to the extent that it makes us regenerative and develop or makes us be. So in that sense, like when you're listening to a comedian, you don't want to know the joke before the joke is delivered. Because, I mean, in a way you want to, in a way you don't want to. Because you want to be surprised pleasantly because you want to enjoy the joke, right? Or somebody giving you a birthday present, and if you are for, that culture of receiving presents and you like that, then you don't want to know the surprise, right? You want the surprise to be at the time of the surprise, not before the surprise. So those are cases where you're trying to have an interesting relationship with uncertainty, unpredictability. Or you're still predicting and want to be right. Or you're still wanting to be certain and you're okay with being wrong about it also, right? So that's a rubric that we have as a species. The second thing that came up was Uh, yes, you're right. On the, in fact, in the book that got written in and published on Kindle this year, which I feel fortunate to have written, there's a special small mention of this thing that we need to do archaeology of words and concepts. We've been using a lot of words in our daily discourse, but we haven't really looked at where are they coming from and what do they mean. And I find it extremely useful for me because when I listen to some of the thinkers, they do stop and they do try and look at words that we've been just using, but we don't know what they mean. For example, if somebody were to stop me right now and ask me, what is the meaning of meaning? Right? I've been saying meaning, meaning, meaning. What is the meaning of meaning? What is the meaning of word? Can I describe a word without a word? Perhaps not. So, what does it mean if I can't describe a word without a word? What are its good things and what are its limitations? Unless I meditate on that, I won't establish a relationship with language and concepts. And I think that's the second bucket. I think we need to revisit our relationship with language and concepts. That's the second bucket. The third bucket is you nicely mentioned that is it is it the case that we're using words because by using words we're getting to some kind of surety? Is it the real surety or is it a false surety in itself? So a 2 by 2 actually comes up, Bunty, for this. Imagine on the x-axis you have something which is underlying, sure, unsure. You're sure about something underlying or you're unsure about something underlying. And let's take the y-axis and we say it's an overlay and we are sure about it or unsure about it. So I believe if we use words as overlay, and so sometimes it could be the case that we are sure about the underlying and we are sure about the overlay, which is the words. Sometimes we are sure about the underlying, but we are not able to express it in words, and we are unsure about it, right? Sometimes we are unsure of both the underlying and the overlay. And sometimes we are very unsure of the underlying, but because of a social pressure or our own internal chaos, we just start speaking and speaking and speaking and speaking because we believe that that's the only ground that we have, because the underlying is not giving the ground. The overlay might give us the ground. So I think as a species, we are in all four quadrants. That's the third submission, Bunty. The fourth submission is sometimes we hold words as constant or hold the non-words. So imagine the world is currently built up of only two things, words and non-words, simplified way. Sometimes we hold the word as constant. Sometimes we hold the non-word as constant. Sometimes we tinker with words, sometimes we tinker with non-words. So we again get four quadrants. Constant words, tinker words, constant words, tinker world, constant non-word, tinker non-word, constant non-word, tinker word. We are in all four quadrants. We're doing it all the time. It's just that we're not aware of the inventory of what we are doing. So a case in point is sometimes if I say, Bunty, I want to be, let's say I make the statement, I want to be honest about my answer to this question. What did I really do? I put it out in words. Now I want to hold these words constant and then tinker with other words so that it references this word, whether I'm being true or not, right? Sometimes the words are constant and then I want to align my actions towards whether these words are being met or not, whether I'm being honest or not. So I think as a human species, we have all four quadratic experience. It's just that the pace of the world and our existing skill set do not allow us to take a step back and reflect on it. So that's the fourth bucket. If you want, I can continue on the other three, or we can stop here and you can chime in. Whichever way, I leave it to you.
You can actually continue, because my question is more generic. It is not in respect to any part of your answer per se so far.
Okay. The fifth thing is, I remember 5-6 years back, I was fortunate to be part of a jamming team of a top 3 ad agency, and they wanted to reimagine one of their client strategy. The client happened to be one of the top 3 telecom player of the country, and in the jamming session, I had to go and share some of the learnings that I had. I very distinctly remember mentioning that if we look at the world from the lens of politics, economics, and society, from 3 rubric, then politics has always been about opinions. Society has been about opinions. But it's the first time ever in our species that politics and society has been about opinions, but economy, for the first time, is a conversation economy. So today we have entered into what a friend of mine used to call as conversation economy, where a lot of things get done through conversations, through emails, WhatsApp chats, decision making. We're not tinkering anything with the physical world. There is a lot of layers of abstractions of the non-physical domain, which we are constantly trading or contesting. And in the conversation economy, the question we have to ask is, are we skillful for this economy? And my reflection tells me we are not. The reason being that, and just yesterday I was speaking with a wonderful acquaintance of mine, Nandini Sood. She is the CEO of Design for Change India initiative. And she said that it took her a long time to understand that listening is a skill.
What is a skill?
Listening is a skill.
Yeah.
And that everywhere else, it's the thing of the barrage of how to be a very good communicator and speaking, but I think listening is underrated and it should be there as a big skill. So tying it back to the bucket that I was mentioning about conversation economy, I think we need to seriously check or reskill ourselves in the dynamics of a conversation economy. I don't think we've come to seize that understanding or awareness, and we're just rushing along. You're right. You're saying, and I think it ties into what you were saying about flamboyance, or just because somebody is a good speaker in the room, a very convincing speaker in the room, a very good debater in the room, uh, does that mean we are closer to truth, or is truth something else, or should we be more truthful about it? And the answer, Bunty, is I don't know. I just feel that too much is happening and too much is being propagandized exceedingly fast for any average human being to sit back and reflect whether they're on the right ship or not. And that, I think, is a tragedy of sorts. And last bit, yes, uh, and this is all tying in. I think we need to, if we were to say that, yes, we are not prepared for the conversation economy, uh, and yes, we need to be slightly different. Now, the question is, how do we become different? So I think we need to, this space that you created, Bunty, here, which you're co-holding, you created and you're co-holding. There is a way in which we are exchanging right now. We need to architecture this space of conversation. So the question comes up: how do you architecture a space for conversation? The answer is: does this so suppose this was a 7-member conversation happening instead of 2. Does the conversation architecture afford or provide for an introvert to participate? Right. So if I'm speaking and speaking for the last 7 minutes or 8 minutes, and I don't stop, and I love my own voice, and I'm not willing to listen, then the architecture will be something which I will grab and I won't give it to anybody else, right? So how do we take pauses? Who gets to speak? When? How do we speak? How do we negotiate disagreements? I think these are some of the people feel that they know it, or they feel it's too frivolous. I'll stop there. But I think this is natural thing to say. Stop here. Go ahead.
You actually brought it all to a nice close in a manner where it kind of all made sense how you were growing. One of the thoughts that struck me was this is again connected but disconnected from what you've been saying. Just yesterday, I was having a conversation with a friend who's very knowledgeable about a lot of things. I use knowledgeable loosely here, not in relation to the dissection that we've been doing in the manner of speaking. Uh, and I was with him and his wife, and we had this just random conversation on one topic where the three of us had a different point of view. This was hardly like a 1.5 minute conversation. I was just about to leave, and it just happened.
Right.
And he landed up making a point which was both macro and micro very well. He speaks very well. He's knowledgeable about a lot of things, and when he speaks, uh, he doesn't speak just to make an impact, although he does make impactful. Uh, he has an impactful expression. Let's put it this way. And the kind of person that you sit with, you cannot make empty statements. He is going to debate and get the better of you very quickly because he is quite good at that. When you brought the seventh point up, where you spoke about how we use flamboyance, uh, it made me question that these days, very often I give up very soon on debates and this because I have realized that all of us come with certain opinions and we try to back it up with data, information, that kind of also. I think it's easy. It helps our mental laziness. This also is a point that I want to bring up because yesterday when I made my point, whatever I was making, he kind of stretched it out and showed me that it was hearsay, and I did realize that it was. Now when I was thinking about it, uh, I approach things being a creative person with a lot of instinct. very often. And instinct may not necessarily have the word or the expression at that point of time, but it stays there, and you know there is something cooking there, and that you need to pay attention uh, to understand it yourself. Uh, okay, one connection to how you speak and what you bring to the equation. Uh, Very often you have references from other people's words that you have internalized and your own equation with them, and you contextualize them to your liking in the way we are having that conversation at that point of time. Uh, Before we had these series of conversations, I had this clarity that there is self experience and what we speak of, and then there is this theoretical way of understanding the subject. And my personal growth and my personal way of functioning is more instinctive and intuitive depending upon my experience. I Of late, I do not use too many words, or I read this here, or read this there, or I heard this, and try and be a little more in the moment of sorts. Obviously, there is memory, there is, like when I was speaking to him, the point I made yesterday was related to something I had seen somewhere. So it is part of me, just that I'm not referencing it at that point of time. I'm just showing it as if it is my understanding of the subject. Uh, so, do you think uh, for us to actually stumble upon the truth that is being available to us in that moment, genuinely so, like it needs a lot of deep diving into, uh, like you, so for example, when you are saying that these words need to be archaeologically tested and understood and gone into the depth of it, and yet you use references that somebody else has done, so maybe your own digging deep has not been, I'm using the word honest very loosely here. I do not mean honest, I don't have the right word, but it is not complete. Okay, let me use the word complete, because it is not Hemant who is speaking, it is Hemant plus A, B, C, D, E that he is read or understood and he is bringing it to the fore. Whereas what Hemant as a thinker should probably, and this is a probability, that you should dig deep and find out what is your instinct saying about it. Now the con of this is that if somebody's already done the thinking for you and has laid it out in a pattern, it's easier for you to build upon it, to go back to that version of that Edison had said that I can see farther than others because I stand on the shoulders of giants. Uh, that kind of thought. And yet uh, there is a third layer to that. So sometimes I stumble upon things and then I read about it, and I realize, oh, like the one example before this, when I came up with this information, knowledge, and wisdom, and you said that somebody else 50, 70, 80 years back had done the same thing. Uh, it kind of, although the words were same, it's not necessarily the words have to be the same all the time. But the thoughts are similar, and it kind of makes us more human. Okay, this is a track of thought that one can pursue because somebody else has also tried. In my own practice, the Buddha has already kind of laid down the entire practice and right up to Buddhahood, and there is nothing secretive about it, just that our understanding has to develop over time to understand what he said. And when you come to it, you kind of understand, okay, this was being said, so you also recontextualize it according to your experience. Uh, this is one of the rare podcasts. I don't seem to have questions, but there are these thoughts which are being laid down for you to understand, okay, this is where my thought process is going. So, how would you see what I first used as a context, my conversation with the friend, your own inability and ability to keep choosing other people's words and references, as well as what is really being understood in that moment. Uh, the hugeness of that truth, however small it might be, but just because it has just revealed itself to you or to me or to both of us or in some other manner because of this conversation to a third person altogether. Because to me that hugeness is what we are all seeking. Hugeness being again a term. I'm saying just the understanding of the perspective of the entire thing in its entirety because it chooses to bless us and okay, you understood it now. And then you move forward from it or whatever, you build upon it or you integrate it in your life. So these, because it also connects back to the original theme, information, knowledge, wisdom. So this is literally dissecting the methodology of these three things. Do you want to say something on that? Before making some notes, do you want to build up on that or you want to say something refreshingly new, whatever?
I actually have 6 buckets now to speak from what you said. Um, the first bucket is about belief change. I think the thing when we come in contact with each other and we exchange, uh, I think we're constantly, as a species, trying to look at who is like me and who is not like me. Uh, and sometimes we want people to be like us because then we believe we gel, we vibe, we sing, we can do something together. You're not my enemy. You're not threatening. Sometimes we don't want others to be like us because then what's unique about us, right? We also want to be unique. It's an interesting paradox. In some sense, we want to belong and we want to be outstanding.
Yeah.
But at different times, in different contexts.
Yeah.
And then we try and see, so when we're judging each other as a species, and within that loose framework of liking and dislike, like me or not dislike me, we are trying to gauge the behavioral inventory and the belief inventory of each other, and from that try and concur whether we are like each other or we are not like each other. And then also as we do that and we come and let's say we're trying to exchange some of our beliefs, we do come across disagreements and different beliefs or different nuances. And when we exchange, what's the urge there? Is the urge that whatever I carry and I speak and I live should be the most right, the most upright, and the other person should heed to it or follow it or whatever needs to be done, praise or knowledge or whatever. When we go down that path, we are actually looking at the rubric of belief change. And there is a whole lot of psychological literature on this now for almost about 30 years. In fact, there's a podcast called You Are Not So Smart by David McRaney. Interesting podcast. I used to hear it for a long time. And in that, he's got 4 episodes of belief, around belief. What is this thing called belief? How does it shift? So that's the first bucket where we need to look at how do we develop our own belief? Have we surveyed them? How much of it is reliant on somebody outside? How much of it is not? So I'll try and tie it back to something that is there in the ancient Indian literature, which is 3 kinds of truth that they broadly signify. One is called as pratibhasit truth, one is vyavharik truth, and one is paramarthik truth. Pratibhasit is your own truth. Vyavharik is more about social truths. And paramarthik it transcends both in some sense. The question of belief change has been looked at. In fact, I have personally also tried whenever I interact with people over a period of time. So okay, let me first close the first. So the first bucket is there is deep inquiry required for the philosophy of belief and for philosophy of belief change. How do people change belief? How do, in fact, one of the things that I believe, at least a good contributor would try and do is also declare wherever possible the major belief shifts that the person has had over a period of time. It's difficult to recall it in the moment most of the times, but I think it's always healthy and honest for a person to declare their beliefs. Where is it coming from, and is it their own, or if it is not own, then cite that person from whom you picked up that belief. Uh, and if you made major belief shifts, then you please also declare, right? So that's the first rubric. The second rubric is what you said about mentally easy and not is so beautiful, Bunty, because 4 to 5 weeks back, you will know Harari, the great historian whose books are pretty famous in terms of Sapiens and Homo Deus. Because of the Israel-Palestinian conflict, he was interviewed, and I think one of his quotes is becoming very popular on social media, where he says that taking sides means you're intellectually lazy, right? So the point that you meant in terms of, are we becoming mentally, lazy, or are we just seeking easy things? Because that's easy for us to, conclude, oh, this person is this. Labeling is easy, right? If I label you, it's the easiest job that I've done. But if I have to really look for whether you uphold those labels, no, I can be wrong. Do I look for contradictory evidences? That's intellectually draining for a lot of people, or a treadmill for a lot of people, right? So that's the second rubric, Bunty. Third is, I do believe that, like we have IQ, right? Intelligence quotient, or we have now social quotients and emotional quotients. All quotients are coming up. I also believe that there could be something called as belief change quotient, which means that each of us have different quotient of what beliefs can we really change. I believe that currently, in the current context, we do have something called as belief change quotient. So you meet a person, depending on the person's exposure and personal reflection, you can fathom whether this person has a high belief change quotient or a low belief change quotient. And then if you get many people in the room who have very low belief change quotient, or somebody with high power but low belief change quotient, then you know where the conversations are going to go. Right? So that's my third bucket. Fourth bucket, about being instinctive and intuitive in when we are contributing. I picked up these two words when you were speaking something, and in fact, there are two researchers who actually say it is the case. Most of the time, there is a guy called Jonathan Haidt, who's a social psychologist. He says most of the time, our intuition has arrived, our reflection, or our conscious thoughts are only trying to use them in the moment. So imagine, if intuitions and reflective thoughts were to be taking a part of the race, intuitions would be first to finish, and reflective thought would come and only support it. So that's very telling. Most of the times, if only our intuitions are speaking, then there is something there. All of us are either being instinctive most of the time, but projecting as if we are reflective, which is also a point made by psychologist Brandon Nyhan, who says that our brain actually functions most like a PR machine. It's a PR machine for all our intuitions and impulses. It's not creating anything new most of the time, unless you follow certain practices. Go ahead.
Just one question. So, are we reading our instinct? Is that what you're mentioning, or the reflection could be completely independent of the intuition itself?
Beautiful. So both these researchers. So I'll tell you where my position is. Where these two popular thinkers' position. These two thinkers would say what you said in a very beautiful metaphor. We are reading from the intuitions. So it's like a book which is already written, and you're only reading it out. So you're not creating anything, right? So that is what they would also conclude, that most of the times you're reading your book of intuition and impulses. You're just becoming good at reading that book, but you're not really good at thinking about it for most of the time. I believe that, and this is my personal belief, I believe that through practices of meditation and a lot of conversational intelligence practices, you can create an override or a veto mechanism over your impulses and your intuitions in the moment. But that requires continuous meditation and practices to be able to observe what is coming up for you in the moment and not be impulsive about it. So that's the fourth bucket. Should I continue, Bunty?
Yeah, please.
Okay. The fifth bucket is, if we just ask ourselves, our lives are governed by a lot of policies and justice and law and order. But if we go back and look at Constitution as a document, and if we ask, is the Constitution scientific? It's an interesting question. Is Constitution scientific? And the answer is no, it's not scientific.
It is not.
But Constitution governs our life so much, right? Who gets what opportunities, resources, outcomes, rights and duties, all in a way are borrowed from Constitution. And why this question is important is, much as a lot of people want to get to the truth, which is, and they believe that science and reasoning is one of the mechanisms, but a lot of things that govern our lives are actually not very scientific. And that should be borne in mind when we are thinking about society, belief change, issues at hand, so on and so forth. And there is obviously, we can have a whole long series of conversation as to how do we look at this first, and are there ways to do it differently?
Yeah.
So the sixth bucket is the bucket of owned reflections and experiences, all of everybody else's reflections and experiences, or a blend of both. I've been largely, depending on audience and context and in the moment awareness, I think I generally veer more towards the third one, the blend. It's also coming from 2 or 3 points, Bunty. One is, actually, while doing the archaeology itself, I came across somebody else doing the archaeology. And sometimes I find, my archaeology is also agreeing with it. So sometimes I just say it's juxtaposed. And sometimes I say their position is this and my position is this. Also in a way to give them tribute to, the excavations that they have been doing so painfully over a period of time. I'll close with last 2 points around the sixth bucket, which is, none of these words that I'm speaking I have ever invented, right? ये मेरे है ही नहीं ये तो मैंने borrow किया वैसे भी तो मैं वैसे ही कोई royalty नहीं दे रहा हूँ, कुछ नहीं कर रहा हूँ मैं. So maybe this is also a way of gratitude. Some people that I know, I attribute, okay, ये words और ये concept वहाँ से लिए मैंने, because a lot of these concepts and words have been borrowed by me. And last point on this is, I remember Dr. Purushottam Agarwal, one of a good thinker in our times today. He was giving a discourse on Mahabharat, and when he was talking about Mahabharat, he said कि महाभारत की एक बहुत interesting बात है कि महाभारत में जब भी कोई ऐसे डायलेमा या घटना होती है जिसपे बहुत ज्यादा रिफ्लेक्ट करना होता है, they always use an invocation where they actually cite ये सिमिलर घटना पहले हो चुकी है, right? So there is this, I think there is this tradition of smriti and shruti, which is a past tradition, and smriti and shruti, if we see followed by different scholars and sages over a period of time, had this practice of referring and citation to others, either refuting it, agreeing it, building on it, or giving a completely orthogonal point. I just feel naturally drawn to that practice, honestly. I'll stop here.
Wonderful. One of the thoughts that was coming to me is that since the topic is information, knowledge, and wisdom, this podcast also, I do not know how many people find it palatable to go in the depth of every uh, nuance that we are trying to cover. And it is not easy. I would not deny the fact, given the paucity of time and um, quick to judgments and reactions on everything. That includes me, of course. Uh, how much time does one really have to reflect on these uh, mental meanderings, if I were to call them, although with a purpose? These are important uh, documentations as far as I'm concerned, which relate to both of us for sure. I do not know about how many other people they are going to relate to, but it is an attempt to uh, give words to thoughts which are generally not covered in everyday conversations most of the time, given the times that we live in today. Um, One question I wanted to ask you, given the kind of mindset that you have and the kind of depth of thought that you try and reach most of the time, irrespective of the methodology that we just discussed, whether it is quoting others or your own experience or a mix of two, there might be other things also which we may not have covered right now. What do you think is the strength of any relations that you build within the family and outside the family? Are people amiable to the depth of thought? Because given the paucity of time, very often uh, one hears yaar dimag pe jor mat dal, becoming uh, a regular way of thinking. I personally also would find myself like, if I, besides the age factor, uh, that one is not giving things enough time to seep in, to understand. A little help comes from meditation and being a writer and being contemplative sometimes about things. But are they really in-depth understanding of the subject that I'm talking about? I'm unsure sometimes. Luckily, the beauty of meditation is that it directly takes you to the depth of the thought itself very often. And instinctively, you know for sure whether you are just talking or you really have understood the subject. You may not be able to communicate always, but instinctively, you seem to have a better handle than your earlier self, if that is a comparison. So, this is closer to the end of the episode for now, but I want to understand how do your particular leanings and the advantage of using it as a professional service also lead to your personal rapport with people around you. Are they accommodating? Are they lenient? Are they aggressive? How do they look at this, quote unquote? I would still think it is a gift, but some days you would. I remember in my younger days, once or twice I felt I wish I was dumb. It would have helped things much better because people seem to relate to each other very fast and connect. And while you were thinking so deeply about every subject that you were tackling, uh, it was difficult. Like this confidence that I have now in my own approach and my own being, whatever it is, wasn't there. And the struggle was real, and you want to belong and you want to um, have an intercourse with others where everybody is also appreciable of what you are doing. So that would be my last submission to you in that sense. What are your experiences about this?
I think two things. I think the only the access that I have of the other, or the others have of me, is through my words and my actions. Like my actions would mean my gesture, my facial expressions, my body language, or what work I do, how I do that work. I'm reminded of an interesting Japanese teacher uh, who had a small, very unassuming tea house, very far from city. And it is said that if you go there, all that person does is just make a very simple tea and serve that tea to you. And in that place, you just go there, you just have tea, you're just silent, and you come back, or maybe stay for a while. That person never used to speak anything. There was no discourse. So I think the first thing that these practices do is your existing actions, your own awareness of the existing actions that you are performing or intuiting, they become different. So, and your own relationship with your words, your own relationship with your actions, your own relationship with the inner turmoil or order shifts over a period of time. And you're able to show up in a slightly different manner. That's number one.
Yeah.
That creates possibility for a slightly better ability to manage disagreements, less impulsiveness, not all the times, by the way. At different points in different times, it's very different. So that's one rubric, your own relationship with self, how you show up, how you respond to things, situation, and people, and what they give you. So that's one rubric from the inside out. From the outside in, I think if I myself would have met my own self, so if my 2010 version would have met my 2023 version, I would have not made sense. I mean, that 2010 version would have just seen it would have appropriated the 23 version in the model of the 10 version. So I'll only appropriate everything to the consciousness level of consciousness that I have and the level of mental models that I have. Because beyond that, I cannot handle ambiguity and I don't have the time. So then if I appropriate it my approaches would be similar most of the times. It won't be drastically different. If I believe that it could be the case with my own version of past self, then I can't be over expecting of somebody else to do it. Because I can judge Bunty. So my own depth will judge Bunty's depth. Only to the extent I have the depth, I can judge Bunty's depth. I definitely cannot judge Bunty's depth beyond my own depth, right? And here it's not being derogatory or less or higher or more or what. It's just that is the case. It's like the orbit, right? If you're orbiting the first orbit outside sun, you're orbiting there. And if somebody is orbiting at the ninth orbit, that person is orbiting there. That's a fact. Now, from the first orbit, the ninth orbit would look different. And the heat of the sun would be such that you won't be able to fathom a lot because you're in superheat. But at the ninth orbit, you're slightly cooled off and you're seeing it differently. So that, and there are, if you look at the nuance, it's so complex. This is why I use the word nuance a lot. In this conversation, I am saying something, Bunty is saying something. I am judging what Bunty is saying, Bunty is judging what I'm saying. I am trying to predict what Bunty will do when I respond to some judgment that I have made of Bunty. You look at the nuance, reactions after reactions after reactions after reaction, or response after response after response. I feel that these practices help you put a speed breaker a lot, in the otherwise impulsive pursuits. I'll halt there.
Okay. It is beautiful. The word speed breaker is being used by you. I use the word pause a lot for myself and for others in a similar context. I was also smiling because there is this book called No Way for the Spiritually Advanced by a guy called Wayne Lickerman, and who's, for the purposes of writing the book, called himself Ramzu. And he's written, these are like incisively sarcastic poems on spirituality and our version. So I think this is not verbatim, but something on the lines of we all approach things from our level of ignorance. And and it actually makes you wince at times and smile at times. And if you do not have the ability to laugh at yourselves, it might be quite a hurtful book to read. And it has only poems of sorts, but it is beautiful because he really makes fun of everything that we hold very dear on the journey. Like always, this conversation seems to be. I have no words. By the time we are through with it, it's like one has emptied oneself fully and needs distance to actually see what has really transpired in the conversation. It's only when I start to write about it on YouTube or to share or assimilate the whole thing that got created in the process, I realize, oh my God, this is a good one. And I look at that version of me, which is as of right now, and say, wow, you seem to be very wise. Where does this disappear so often? But thank you so much for this, what you lovingly call co-creation. It's not my word, but not even my chosen word in that sense, but I love what it tells me. The whole, maybe there is a more integrated word somewhere in the world, but the feeling is definitely mutual on this, and I find it. I'm just praying that most people in the world get benefited by these conversations we are trying to have, and with our little limited selves, whatever we are putting out there is being done in the best interest of humanity. Thank you so much, and
Thanks a lot, Bunty.
let all be blessed.
Thanks a lot, Bunty. Thanks.
Yeah.